Hello, everyone, and welcome back for season 2 of the Wellness on Purpose podcast. Here at the Wellness on Purpose podcast, we appreciate that there is no linear path along one's wellness journey and understand how easy it can be to get caught up in the latest health trends found on social media. Our intention is to provide you with impactful, educational, and realistic information to help you progress on your journey to live wellness on purpose now and for future generations. For the launch of Season 2, our host and nutritionist Marissa Laughlin will be offering you guidance through the Back to Basics series, in which she will cover topics such as digestion, sleep, stress, and balanced nutrition. If you are ready to progress on your journey, stay here and take notes. Hey guys, welcome back. It's your host Marissa here, and today we are talking with Victoria Evans. Victoria has become an inspiration by sharing her challenges related to eating disorders, mental health, extreme dieting, and over-exercising, which has become a catalyst for creating a solution to an issue millions of women face every single day. As a successful intuitive eating coach, she is disrupting the diet industry through her fundamentally science-based approach. Victoria helps countless women heal their relationship with food by optimizing their mindset for a happier and healthier lifestyle. So without further ado, let's jump into this amazing episode. All right, so welcome, Victoria. Thank you so much for coming on the Wellness on Purpose podcast. We're so excited to have you to talk about your wellness journey and how you live wellness on purpose now and in your everyday life. But let's just dive right into it and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what your passions are, where your wellness journey started, and so on.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, share a little bit more about my story, what I've learned along the way, and hopefully help some of your viewers and listeners. So kind of my story, as it were. I'm from Kawartha Lakes. So I grew up, I was very athletic. I actually ended up playing volleyball in the States, NCAA volleyball. And while I was there on scholarship, unfortunately what happened was there was a sexual assault, and I ended up really shutting down, and I basically put on a lot of weight to kind of protect myself and really build this armor up. And then from there, I went to corporate, and I was working in the beauty industry, and essentially I felt like kind of the solution to everything was going to be to lose weight. I'm someone who struggled with a lot of depression, anxiety growing up, and I thought that the solution, my life is going to start once I lose this weight, once I look a certain way, everything's going to fall into place. And so I was at this company, which was a very vogue kind of culture, beauty industry, and I'd convinced myself that I should just lose some weight and I'll be happy. So I turned to social media, as many of us do, and I found the influencer with the best abs, the most followers, and I bought her 12-week, weight loss guaranteed program. And I went all in. I was tired of the starting over and the tomorrow's a new day. And what happened was I started losing weight really, really, really quickly.
First off, how old were you when the sexual assault happened in the States?
Yeah, so I was 19 years old. So it was my second semester of my first year.
Okay. And then, so how long were you in school before you moved to the corporate world?
Yeah, so I graduated a semester early. I went to school in Pennsylvania for 3.5 years. And then I moved to Montreal, where I started working the Fortune 500 corporate company, and I worked there for ultimately 2 years.
And were you one of the younger people that worked in the corporation? Because I feel like some people, when you get into a corporation and you're fresh and new, you have this idea of what you should look like in an environment like that. And do you think that kind of influenced your idea to be like, I need to lose weight, I need to be this, that, the other to fit into this corporation?
Yeah, I was definitely coming into the corporation feeling very insecure in who I was. So much of my personality had been defined by being an athlete my entire life. And then all of a sudden, I had gained some weight in university. I wasn't performing as well. My coaches were really hard on me. And what was once a stress reliever, an anxiety reliever, volleyball, became a stress inducer. And so I kind of lost a bit of my identity there. And then I started working for this big company. And again, this kind of total identity loss. Who am I? I'm starting this corporate job. And I looked around and everyone was very vogue, you know, beauty industry, high level, like people had like different colored eyebrow kind of thing, like colored, like very kind of Hunger Games almost kind of a look. If that kind of gives people a bit of an idea of what it was like there. And so like high heels, tight outfits, that was kind of the look. And I'm coming in someone who's basically been wearing a lot of sweatpants and hair in a messy bun, being an athlete, and just felt totally disconnected. So I think some of it is definitely the age of thinking like, okay, I need to fit in, I need to assimilate. But I think as well, there was a huge part of the company culture where you had to kind of look a certain way to uphold the standard of the company.
And how long did you stay working in corporate?
So I was there ultimately for 2 years. And so the first few months, I essentially, no one knew who I was. I was sitting at my desk, eating lunch by myself. No one really talked to me. And so then again, this idea, like if I just like lose weight and change my body, then I'll be seen and then I'll be loved and people want me. And this whole, big idea that the diet industry really sells to us that, when we're in the after photo, everything's perfect. We're smiling, all of a sudden we look really good. Our life is amazing. And that's kind of what I told myself and convinced myself would be the reality.
So then you bought this program online and it was 12 weeks, correct? Mm-hmm. Was this something that you saw through for the entire 12 weeks?
Yeah, so I was about 8 weeks into it, and I ended up losing about 70 pounds in a matter of like weeks. It was insane. And I was basically not eating. So it was a really limiting meal plan. I'd messaged her being like, I'm dizzy all the time and I have no energy and I feel horrible. And she's like, oh, it's just your stomach shrinking, like just intermittent fast and drink more black coffee. Like it's fine. Like total red flags looking back. But in that moment, I was like, well, you do have abs and you have millions of followers. So I'm going to blindly trust you. And I think that's also, an issue with social media is that we see the number of likes, the number of follows, and we just trust that they know what they're talking about without kind of second guessing it. And that's gotten into, for myself, a lot of trouble, but a lot of people as well. This idea that we can just, trust people based off of how many people are following them. So yeah, I lost a bunch of weight. And the difficult thing was I went from kind of invisible to an inspiration essentially overnight. I went from being totally invisible to people talking to me, and I had the boyfriend, and then I got a promotion and I got the apartment, and all of a sudden I was getting all this attention. And I think as well, sometimes we confuse attention with happiness and attention with love because it was very fleeting. So I was kind of anchoring on my self-worth and who I was, these moments of, you look amazing, how did you do it, and all of that. And that became this kind of addictive, almost like a drug, if I needed more and more and more of it. And it also started to become my identity of being the really skinny but also really fit girl at work who was always working out and weighing everything on her food scale and being really obsessive. And it can also be one of those things where it's like, where is the line between motivation and sickness, right? Like, where is that? And a lot of people, we just continue to praise them for, getting up at 4 a.m. and going to the gym, or, always saying no to all the foods. But at what point does it become kind of disordered or just eating disorder? And I think as a lot of what I do and a lot of my work, it's, we need to stop praising people like weight loss or their body is the biggest accomplishment that they can do, because you never know what's going on behind the scenes. If it's an eating disorder, if it's anxiety and they lost weight because of that, or they gained weight and they're actually in recovery, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's like one of the biggest issues with social media is it's, you perceive everything as what's right there in front of you and nothing past that. So it can be so dangerous. And especially to women, I feel like we uphold this high level, especially when we're working in a corporate industry. And actually probably every industry, if we're, competing for dominance, whether it's male to female or a higher position, that all plays such a huge influence on what you look like, what you want to show to everybody else, right? You followed this program for 8 weeks. At what point did you say, okay, enough is enough, and when you would consider yourself needing to back away from the plan or that lifestyle?
It's funny because I had this kind of voice in my head that was like, Victoria, it's gone a bit far. You can't go out to eat with your friends. You are missing events. You can't, like, my life was becoming really, really small and just hyper focused around food and my body. But, I'd romanticized this idea of having a smaller body my entire life, and I was finally getting there. And so even though I had these warning signs that like this was starting to take on a life of its own, it really just spiraled out of control because I had taken on this identity of this is who I am, and I can be this person and go to the parties and, get the promotion. And I had associated all of these good things happening with needing to be in a smaller body. And I couldn't really distinguish myself from looking this way and behaving this way. And so it really can just spiral into an eating disorder from there. And that's the thing. It's like no one ever thinks like, oh, I'm gonna have an eating disorder. It's like, no, it starts off like a diet. It starts off like, I want to lose a few pounds, and then it's not enough, and it's never enough. That's the thing. There's never going to be a weight that you reach that you're satisfied with. It's never gonna, like, if the scale goes up, if it goes down, it moves. Like there's so much judgment and association that we place on the scale and on our bodies, and we need to kind of remove that and take a step away and realize that, yeah, we're so much more than bodies. And when we put that much focus and attention on what we look like, it can quickly get out of hand.
Absolutely. And when you were realizing that this was something more than just following an 8-week or 12-week plan, did you have a hard time letting go of like the scale in the sense of weighing yourself as well as your food and the restrictions around food that you were having? Or was it kind of like you woke up and were like, this is enough, I'm done with this and I'm ready to move on? Like what was that transition phase like for you?
Yeah, it was, I wish I could say it was a quick kind of like this is very clear. It was several moments of I can't continue on like this, but I don't know how to not. And so went on for several more months like that. I ended up losing my period. My hair was falling out. I was a total disaster of a person, but I was still holding on to those compliments. I was still holding on to this idea that I would reach this weight where I would be happy and it would be enough. Like I was convinced that if I just lost a few more pounds, then everything would be fine. But as I was doing that, my brain was changing, my body was changing, my life was changing, and I felt like I was getting into a deeper hole that I didn't know how to get out of. And so ultimately it was 3 a.m. and I had woken up middle of the night because I was so hungry. And I went to my kitchen and took I took a handful of trail mix. The only thing allowed to have in my whole house was coffee. I think I had trail mix. And then I think I had like protein powder and like pre-workout. Like that was pretty much all I had in my house. And
Wow.
yeah, it got really, really bad. And so I took this extra handful of trail mix, and then I started panicking because it was over what I'd considered, what I was allowed to have for that day, which was very low calories. Like it was well under 12,000 calories a day. And I'm 5'10". I was working out multiple hours a day, and I would work all day standing desk and heels. So like I was just in the most extreme possible calorie deficit. And so my body was starving itself, and I thought it was sabotage, but it was really my body just trying to protect itself from dying, essentially. And so what happened was I had this extra handful of trail mix, and I just completely broke down. I was on the floor, I was crying, didn't know what to do. Like I can't go back to sleep with these calories in my body. So I crawled to the closet on all fours, and I pulled on my running gear, and I ended up, I remember walking out of my apartment. It was pitch black in Montreal, and starting to run up the mountain there, Mount Royal, and just like crying and running because I didn't know how to not go for a run and burn it off. But I was so tired, like just exhausted. And so I was running up this mountain, and I remember the headlights of the cars like letting out my face as I was crying. And I eventually got to the top, and I'd done about 30 kilometers at this point. Like it's just a magic number that I'd pulled out of my head that seemed like a good punishment for eating that much trail mix. And yeah, I had this moment at the top of the hill where I was like, the sun was rising, and I was like, you know what? Like, there's never going to be this point where I get to where it's going to be enough weight loss. Like, I'm never going to get to that point. And also that I can't do it alone. I kind of convinced myself that I could kind of solve it, or that it was my burden to bear. But ultimately, in that moment, and that's the thing about an eating disorder, it's not an illness of the body, it's an illness of the mind. And so we have to kind of look at it because it is a mental illness. So you're not thinking straight. And so for me, like I knew I had to have someone help me. And so I had that realization on the top of the mountain. It's very dramatic. And then I came home and I called an eating disorder hotline and kind of just like spilled everything to them, my whole story, my struggles with everything, like depression, anxiety. perfectionism and how everything kind of ultimately related into this idea of controlling food and controlling my body and thinking that was a solution. So that was kind of that rock bottom moment for me that kind of started to segue into recovery and ultimately a wellness journey that was fueled by wellness and not by sickness.
Wow. So an eating recovery hotline, how accessible is that for people to use as a tool?
Yeah, I think it's a really great option if you are at the beginning of your journey and you're like, I don't even know where to go. And I'm also really afraid. So for me, there was, especially things like eating disorders, there's a lot of shame involved. There's a lot of feeling like people should perceive me a certain way. I should look a certain way. And so coming and asking for help kind of feel really intense and really scary and overwhelming. So something like eating disorder hotline is kind of a great first step where you can start to feel that support and have someone point you towards resources. So they connected me with a psychologist in Montreal and they gave me some different resources there and just let me speak and just hold space for me to just talk and offload things I didn't even know I had to say, but I realized I'd never been asked, you know? And so it's definitely really accessible. And if you literally just Google eating disorder hotlines in Ontario, Quebec, whatever it is, they'll come up a whole thing. But I would highly recommend if you're listening to this and you're struggling right now, like you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to wait until you're running up the mountain at 3 a.m. to ask for help. Like you're always worthy of asking for help.
Absolutely, for sure. So when you started your journey to recovering from your eating disorder, can you talk a little bit about that timeline? Like, I feel like when I've talked to people before in the past about eating disorder, it's never really something that you're fully, we could say, healed from. It's something that you kind of carry with forever. But then some people will say, I am recovered from that. I am healed from that. But can you talk a little bit about what your outlook is on moving through the journey for recovery and then what it looks like after?
Yeah. So the way I kind of compare and the way I talk about it with my clients, it's almost, I think about it like you're in the car and your radio's on really loud. And that's kind of like your eating disorder. It's like you don't realize it, especially as it's getting worse, maybe how it's starting to get louder and louder and louder. And it just becomes your new normal. And you start to get into recovery and you start to hear these different perspectives. You're talking, you're sharing. And it's like slowly turning the knob down on the radio. And you can slowly start to kind of hear yourself again because it sounds like it's your voice, right? It sounds like it's you telling you to do all these things, but it's your eating disorder. And so when you start to move through the recovery process, you have these moments where you start to hear yourself again. It's like the volume is kind of turned down. You're like, oh yeah, okay, that's not my thought. And you can start to challenge it. And then some days it's louder than others. Some days it's a bit more quiet. So now, like for me, most days I don't hear it, that voice. But sometimes, you know, there's such situations, things will happen, I'm triggered, and like I do hear that voice, but I recognize what it is. Um, and so I think definitely people can be at different points in their recovery journey, always, but it is so much deep healing. Like it's requires an insane amount of work because it's not about our body, it's not about food. It's just that's a symptom of an underlying problem. And so you have to do the deeper work to understand like where did these feelings, where did these emotions, you know, where was this all coming from? Because if you don't do that, it's kind of just like a band-aid over a bullet wound.
Absolutely. So along your journey, what would you say are some of those healing tools that you use that help you root down into what that deeper layer was?
Yeah. So for me, I was in starting the recovery process and I was going to see like a psychologist weekly and I was doing like a workbook and all of that. And I was kind of frustrated because I felt like I was having a lot of insight into what my issues were, but not necessarily a lot of transformation moments. So it was like, oh, this happened in my past. This was this. I bring up a lot of emotion. I'd leave and just kind of be like, feel like I was walking on eggshells. Like now what? So for me, I really had to dig into the science behind it. Like, why was my brain doing these things? Why do I think this way? Because I thought that there was something wrong with me. I thought I was broken, which is a very disempowering way to think about yourself, especially when you're trying to recover and you feel very, you know, victim like to begin with. So when I was starting to do a lot of research and understand how an eating disorder brain works, what kind of fuels us, what, you know, drives us, different things like connection, healing, trauma, emotions, vulnerability, like all these big things that I had no idea. And I thought it was just me, you know, self-sabotaging or, you know, not being good at motivation or being too motivated, whatever it was. And so when I was able to really dive into the science side of things, I felt so empowered. And so from that space, I was able to start kind of creating these different tools and techniques to overcome things like food fear, or to overcome like a lot of that negative self-talk in my head, the inner mean girl. Different little things to kind of anchor it in, to kind of pair with the counselor, psychologist, so that it was kind of this holistic approach to recovery instead of just kind of a talk therapy, which can work great for some people. But for me, it was needing to anchor it in into kind of actionable steps in order for me to fully kind of get to that place of recovery.
So your recovery phase has turned into your passion. It's now what you do as you're living to help to support other women. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like now as, you know, your day-to-day passion, and how you promote that to your community and everybody else on social media platforms as well?
Yeah, so I'm calling right now. I'm talking to you. So I'm in Bali, Indonesia. So I am from Coeur d'Alene, but I've been living in Bali for 2 years. So I ultimately quit my corporate job in Montreal, began my online coaching business. So as I mentioned, I took a really science-based approach to my recovery, something that I've not seen anyone really do. It's usually either very heavily emotions-based, like different kind of meal plans. And so I'm someone who's very analytical, very rational. I need to understand why I'm doing something in order to do it. And so I was really successful in my own recovery journey, and I've been posting about it on Instagram. And I started having these people kind of coming to me being like, how are you doing this? Like, why is this working for you? This and that. And ultimately ended up picking them up as beta clients. So free clients to kind of go through this program that kind of saved my own life. That I was like, yeah, you know, let's try it with you guys. And was really successful with it. So decided like, you know what, let's make this a thing. There seems to be a bit of a white space in, you know, the recovery space for women who have that very kind of analytical, rational mind, very high achievers, who want to recover. They want the tangible steps. They want to how to do that deep dive, but don't necessarily have the resources or the access to them that they need to. And so I took this opportunity and I was like, you know what, I love it. I'm so passionate about understanding the biology, the neuroscience, everything, how our brain, our body works at the core of it, to help women feel really empowered. That's really what I like. That's what my driving force is. You know, I take a very kind of a feminist approach. Like, we deserve to take up space. We don't deserve to be constantly shrinking our bodies. You know, we can't smash the patriarchy on an empty stomach kind of a thing. That's very much my vibe. And so, yeah, I launched my online coaching business, and I've been living here in Bali. And so I do one-on-one coaching with my clients, and everything is run mostly through Instagram or LinkedIn, my own podcast, or in person. I do some things there as well, speaking events, workshops, and yeah.
That's amazing. That's so awesome. So you live in Bali now. Would you say that the health and wellness, if we want to call it that, industry in Bali is different from here in Canada?
Oh, it is so different. I could barely even scratch the surface. I feel like I'm in the holy mecca of like healing people. Like, everyone just like comes here to kind of heal and um, be really spiritual. And I'm someone who I wasn't very spiritual before I moved to Bali. And there's this like a lot of people who talk about that here, and that's very their focus. A lot of health, a lot of plant-based here. You know, a lot of crystals and like all of that stuff that I thought was absolutely ridiculous before, that I'm starting to kind of learn more about, which is an interesting journey. But yeah, the wellness industry here, it's very much rooted, I would say, in kind of a plant-based, spiritual kind of a sense. So I wouldn't necessarily as much about kind of optimizing health in terms of like efficiency, and it's kind of more inner child in some ways and tuning in, which for me, the total opposite of where I came from. So it's been a really cool experience to kind of balance that out a little bit and kind of learn a different side that people use to recover as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you feel that the pace of your lifestyle is different in Bali as opposed to Canada?
It's a lot slower here. I think that there's so much glorification of the hustle and the grind, and I call it the busy Olympics, like just always being busy and like who's the busiest and who has the most emails. And I used to totally do this. I would champion myself on having the most emails over other people. Oh, you only got this many emails at the end of it? Like, it was just ridiculous. But it made me feel important that I was busy, not realizing that at the core of it, like, I wasn't happy and what makes me happy. And you don't have to be always busy all the time to be worthy. And that has been a big thing that I've learned here in Bali, is just how to slow down and knowing like things can happen, things can work better. And we give ourselves that space to kind of breathe and check in, which is something I love to work with my clients on, is like how to just find that balance and that calm and that slow, because it's so much easier to forge a path when you kind of take a second and see where you are instead of just kind of blowing and just going super fast. I talk about it. It's kind of like we spend our life climbing the ladder to only realize that we're on the wrong building. And then we kind of have like a bit of a crisis there. We're like, oh my God.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like the perfect way to describe it, is climbing the wrong building and being like, oh my God, what am I doing here? Right? That's so true. So maybe give us a little rundown on like what your day-to-day routine looks like recovering from an eating disorder, or also working in that industry, and how you've kind of slowed your life down and what that ideal day looks like for you.
Yeah. So being an intuitive eating coach, every day is a bit intuitive. So it will kind of shift and vary depending on my mood. And before I was like, oh, I have to work out every single day and la la la. But now it's like, okay, how am I feeling today? Checking in. So yeah, waking up, first thing I usually do is some yoga, meditation. And then I usually take some client calls first thing in the morning, just because that's back to North America. Here we have a 12-hour difference. And then
So right now in Canada, it's 10:30 a.m. So what time is it there in Bali?
10:30 p.m.
PM. Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's nighttime. Yeah, I know. It's so weird. It's like it's tomorrow for me. Like, yeah, I can tell you all the things about the future. But, yeah. So, yeah, it's so my mornings. Yeah, I usually take calls, and then after calls, I make myself a nice breakfast. Maybe do some journaling. My days are usually a bit of a lull. Like I usually mostly work in the morning and nights. Maybe I go for a swim. Maybe I do some groceries, then I come home, maybe do some work. I go to CrossFit, so I'm a CrossFitter. So most days I go at 4:30, and then after that, I'll maybe catch sunset on the beach, come home, take a couple more client calls, and then yeah, do some like wind down before I go to bed. So maybe some reading or some writing, some art, some things that are fun. Like I think honestly so much, I thought adulthood was not having fun anymore. Like I thought I had to just be kind of grumpy and angry and busy all the time, not realizing like that's not fun at all, you know? Like we actually get to still play and have fun and do cool things. And you know, we don't have to always be grinding and working. Like what is the point that we grind and work so that we get to a place where we can be happy, or we could just be happy and not worry about the grinding and the working? And then, you know, everyone has their own objectives and goals, but kind of ask why they're your goals, why they're your objectives, and what is the feeling you hope to create behind it? And are you sacrificing time with your family and loved ones and friends to get to a place that you think will give you this feeling that you could have right now if you just slowed down and checked in?
Absolutely. Two questions about your current lifestyle. First question is, with your eating habits, what does that look like now? Do you, like you mentioned, obviously it's an intuitive lifestyle. So is there anything that you will not compromise in your diet, in the sense of will not consume, or is there any type of boundaries that you're set for yourself that you follow?
Yeah. So with intuitive eating, it is definitely a journey. I mean, ultimately we're born as intuitive eaters. Like we all know how to eat intuitively. It's just kind of along the way, we've ended up with all these layers kind of telling us what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, superfoods, this and that. Like there's just so much misinformation thrown in there that we feel like we can't trust our bodies. We don't know how to listen to our bodies. And so for me, it's been this journey of kind of peeling back all these layers to just get to this place where it's like, yeah, I actually know how to trust my body, know how to listen to my body. Which the cool thing is that now for me, there is nothing off limits. There is nothing that I can't consume. I do tend to follow a bit more a plant-based diet, but that is simply because I like the way it makes me feel. And the food here in Bali is a lot of plant-based, and I like the restaurants that make it, and it's really accessible. But I'll also go and have, you know, a meat meal. So for me, it's focusing on this idea of abundance, because I think a lot of the time we get into a lot of the guilt and the shame and the judgment. And when we kind of have that mentality of I can't or I shouldn't, I always say that restriction creates rebellion and allowance creates space for choice. So when we just give ourselves that, I'm allowed to have this, I have permission to have this, then all of a sudden we can actually choose if we want to have it, if it would feel good to us, versus, I'm having it because I'm not supposed to have it kind of a mentality, which a lot of people fall into, think that they're helping themselves by, shaming themselves and guilting themselves, saying, I can't have the chocolate, when in reality, that shame and guilt is driving you to want to seek comfort. The seeking comfort, you usually end up eating food, not moving your body. So it kind of has the total adverse, the opposite effect of what you want, versus leaning into the space of abundance and leaning into what feels good, and feeling good, not just like a momentary just eating to feel good, but kind of digging in as well to kind of like emotionally feeling good and checking in with that too.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I myself am a nutritionist. And when I first came out of nutrition school, it was very cookie cutter. It was this way or that way. There was no in between. And I will admit, in the beginning of my practice, when you come out of something like that, that's the only way you feel that you can thrive in your practice is following those guidelines. And about 2 years into my practice, I realized this isn't fun for me. This isn't fun for me to tell people you can and cannot do this. You can and cannot have these foods. And it just feels like you're not even providing the service. That's why they're coming to you, is to trust you to give them guidelines. I mean, yes, there are some guidelines, obviously, that are important to be mindful of, like making sure you're consuming water, making sure you're consuming protein, those types of things. But I will say professionally, it took me, probably 2 years to realize this isn't sustainable for people to follow these very, very strict guidelines. And it's also not accessible for everybody to do that either. So I love that you mentioned that you primarily follow more of a plant-based diet because that is the environment that you're living in right now. And that's what we need to also take into consideration, is what's accessible to us financially, as well as, in our area. What can we buy that's like locally grown or that's sustainable, and so on and so forth, right? Because I think that there's also that, we can kind of classify that an eating disorder piece to that is also that perfect, clean, all good food titled diet as well too. And that really in itself is another form of an eating disorder.
Categorize that as orthorexia now, which I worked with a lot of women, and I definitely considered myself that, like that obsession with healthy eating. And especially in the age of social media, when all you see is the beautifully curated food that they take pictures of, this idea that we can never, just have the burger or just eat the chips or the fries, like, and you're allowed to eat the chips and the fries, and like, it's human, and we're allowed to do that, and giving yourself that permission to do that. And the more that we shame and guilt ourselves and tell ourselves we have to be a certain way, the more that you're setting yourself up for failure, ultimately.
Absolutely. And whether it's the mindset or the body part to that as well too, is there's really not that rewarding thing that we are expecting at the very end. And even you mentioned that, you said, if I just had this body size, I would be XYZ, right? Like I would be this and that. And it's led you down this incredibly beautiful journey to becoming an intuitive coach you're just thriving, you're loving life, you're, sharing the ups and downs on social media, which is fantastic. And it's really inspiring to many people, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's been such a journey. And I think at the core of it, it's been vulnerability. And my whole life, I thought I had to be perfect. I was wearing full makeup and straightening my hair perfectly and doing everything perfectly since the age of like 12, because I thought that's why people would like me. If I look perfectly and do everything perfectly, then people will love me and accept me. Because I always felt very disconnected. I felt like I didn't belong. And the irony of that is that we don't connect with perfect, we connect with imperfect. So when we recognize, our flaws in someone else and these imperfections, it's like, oh my God, you have that too. That happened to you too. Like we develop that friendship, that deep rooted, like, oh, I see you and you see me. And so for me, so much this recovery journey has been breaking down these walls of thinking that I have to be perfect and I have to be a certain way, and realizing that that was why I was disconnected. And connection ultimately is just that vulnerability and knowing that we're not alone in it, and we're not supposed to be doing this alone, right? We're supposed to be connecting as humans and sharing, which has been really inspiring to, and especially a great way to use social media is to follow accounts where you feel connected to them and not shamed by them. So I see a lot of women following accounts that they consider inspirational, but at the core of it, it just makes them feel terrible because they feel like their life isn't like them. They don't look like them. They don't eat like them. And that just drives them into this feeling of shame and unworthiness. So I invite people to kind of do what I call a Marie Kondo of their social media feed and just be like, does this bring me joy? Like truly joy. And, unfollow accounts that don't bring that to you, add in more accounts that do bring you that joy. And if you have, a certain body feature that you struggle with loving, so for example, cellulite, maybe you follow a bunch of accounts that have women who have more exaggerated or, whatever the body type is, like who have that exaggerated feature of that, because our brain works off of familiarity. And so if you're exposing yourself in a virtual environment to something like, for example, a lot of cellulite, and you have cellulite, when your brain sees that, hey, it's okay to have this, other women have this, and you feel that sense of, oh, I can, belong in this tribe, as it were, how our brain is working through thinking it has to belong to survive, essentially. When we see ourselves represented, it gives ourselves permission to be ourselves. And so not only do when we're vulnerable, other people get to connect with us and gives them that permission, but it releases so much that feeling that we have to be on, we have to be perfect, which because we're human, that's not possible, ultimately just drives us to feeling shame. So
Absolutely, for sure. So who would you say are some of your biggest wellness inspirations?
yeah, so when I first was using social media, I was using it in the wrong way. Like I said, I was using it for like the Fitspiration and all these things that were really shaming me. So now I love to follow accounts like Kenzie Brenna or Own It Babe, had her on the podcast. She's awesome. Or even
And she's
people.
local too.
Yeah, she's local. She just moved out to Alberta. I've been following her on social media, so she's out there. So my sister's out there, and I was like, see, you can see her. Or even, I'm on YouTube, like Button Poetry is a lot of really, really awesome spoken word poets. So for example, like Blythe Baird, she has really great content. So but once you start to follow these accounts, it'll give you the suggestions for other ones, and they call out other people. So you'll fall down a really awesome rabbit hole of inspirational people, and just be open to it. And social media can be such a amazing place where you can feel really safe and feel really seen and connected if you choose to let it be that. So it's kind of the choice is yours, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to your wellness routine. Is there something that's in your current wellness routine that's, either a product or something that you use every single day?
Yes. So I love coconut oil. It's the best thing. And so I have it here locally, like it's locally made in Bali here. But for me, a huge piece of my struggle was feeling really disconnected from my body. And so I love using coconut oil in the just first 2 minutes in the morning, just giving myself like a coconut oil massage, like just a little bit of coconut oil and just, like grazing my arm, like calves, and just kind of taking a second to slow down and check in. Especially like first in the morning, we wake up, our cortisol, stress hormone levels are the highest. So if we can take that second to not just fly into our day and check our phone, our emails, and just send our stress to the roof even more, but see how we're feeling, take a second and connect with your body in a way that is actually loving instead of that kind of grabbing at ourselves and hating ourselves, which often, for me anyways, was the only time I was really touching my body before, was kind of that like shame and kind of like, oh, I want to rip all my skin off kind of thing. Versus now it's kind of really focusing on that kind of loving kind of connection touch, which has been really helpful for me.
That's amazing. That's such a supportive way to connect with all areas of the body, which is amazing. Now, do you take coconut oil internally as well, or are you just using it more on the outside of the skin?
More just on the outside of the skin. I have a lot of friends who use it internally. I haven't personally, but it's definitely something that I'm open to and I'm learning about. I'm always, open to trying different things and all that. So yeah.
Yeah, there's so many benefits with coconut oil because it does have like a natural antibacterial, antifungal property to it. So if you are someone who, struggles with oral thrush or bad breath or sometimes overgrowth of bacteria in the body, it can help to support that too. So coconut oil is really that like magic answer. It's like I'm obsessed with castor oil, and coconut oil is like a strong second with that. So I also use coconut oil all the time too.
So good. Or just to make popcorn. Like I love just making like stovetop popcorn with it, and just the best. I'm like there's just so many uses for this.
Perfect. And once you make stovetop popcorn with coconut oil, there's no turning back. Like nothing compares to it.
No.
No.
Sorry to everyone out there listening, like your life has forever changed, and I'm not sorry.
I love it. Another question about your wellness routine. So you mentioned that you are a CrossFitter. When you jumped back into that active routine, were you a little bit hesitant or was it something that you kind of dove right into?
I was so hesitant because my relationship to exercise had been really toxic. It had been from a space of punishment or it had been for permission to eat. It was never something to make me feel empowered, to feel good. It was always, I should, I have to. It always been to burn calories. And so the question I was asking myself now, and I invite people to ask themselves as well, is if I knew this didn't burn calories, would I still want to do it? Right? And kind of at the core of it, like, does this bring me joy? Does this make me feel good? And I really work out for my mental health. Like, I know it really helps me when I move my body. And so CrossFit has been really amazing for me. And initially, I was really kind of nervous stepping into it, but they have a really supportive, amazing community. And one of the best things for me was that there was no mirrors. I couldn't see myself anywhere. And someone who had been really fixated on how I looked in the mirror at the gym and my biceps and are people looking at me, blah, blah, blah. It was a way that I could just totally connect with my body and focus on the movements and feeling empowered and learning new skills, which really helped me develop a new sense of confidence as well. And see my body in a way that was really strong and capable. Instead of in the mirror, I was often looking at it kind of from a shaming and really kind of scrutinizing way. So CrossFit for me was incredibly healing. And it was hard, learning all the different movements and growing in that area was definitely a challenge, but it's a way that for me developed that sense of confidence. It developed, feeling good in my body, and it really changed my relationship to exercise because it made me feel confident instead of just doing it to burn calories.
And is there some weeks where you're like, I know this is kind of too much for my body right now, and you feel okay with, skipping days or taking more rest days as you need? Like, is that part of the intuitive lifestyle that you live?
Oh yeah, I'm all about intuitive movement. I think, pushing yourself to work out in a day that you are tired and hurting is more harmful to your health than going to the gym, like 100%. Whether it just be like the mental aspect of you're damaging your relationship to exercise mentally, or physically you're hurting your body because you're exerting it too much. So I liberally take rest days and they're great. And it's not as, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I've done this. I shouldn't eat this today, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I tune into my body. I honor what that needs. So yesterday I took the day off. Today I went. Tomorrow I'll see how I feel. People, I was like, we'll see you tomorrow. Like maybe. Like I don't know. Like could happen. And just giving yourself that permission and knowing like you're just as worthy to eat and to exist on the days that you don't work out, the days that you do, and asking yourself, am I doing this because of love or am I doing this because of shame? Because I love myself, I want to feel good, empowered, or if this like shame that I'm like burning it off and this is like punishment. And whether it come to anything, food, exercise, work, whatever it is, love or shame, that's a great way to kind of lean into how to move forward.
I love that so much. So, last question for you, Victoria. You are stuck either in an elevator or in a room with somebody, and you've got some time to give them some of your support and information. So, what would you share as your famous actionable tools to help live more of an intuitive lifestyle starting today?
I would say to people to stop living like we're going to live more than once. Um, I'm so tired of seeing so many people, women, dimming their light and declaring themselves kind of unworthy of living this great, big, incredible life. Like they settle for what they have and tell themselves they should be grateful while secretly wishing that there was more. And so I tell them it's okay to dream big and it's okay to act on those dreams. And at the core of it, though, asking why are those your dreams? Like what do I hope to achieve? What is the feeling behind it? Was this my dream? Was this a dream passed on to me by a family member? Something I picked up from society? And again, this idea of am I climbing the wrong building kind of a thing. And so, I think ultimately wellness is leading a life where you feel proud of yourself when you are by yourself. And so it's really this kind of the state of being. And so for people to kind of live that intuitive lifestyle, I invite you to kind of slow down, check in, create that space in your life where it's just you, not filled with media, not filled with music, not filled with anything. And just ask yourself, like, what do I need right now? What do I want? And intuitive eating just starts with the questions. It starts with the curiosity. It starts with leaning in to a space that we thought we previously could not trust, could not listen to, but you can. And it just takes that slowing down and giving yourself the opportunity.
That's amazing. I love that. And it really comes down to listening to what's going on in the mind, like just sitting in silence, being by yourself in silence. And sometimes I will ask people that, like in a client session, like how often do you spend sitting by yourself with absolutely zero stimulation, no music, no noise, nothing in the background? And most people say never. It's like, I either don't have time for it, or I have this going on, this, that. It comes down to that you are not prioritizing that time for yourself to achieve that. And it is unbelievable what can happen when you just silence everything that's around you.
The game changer. People think they're trying to get somewhere so quickly, but it's like, are you going the right direction, right? Like, slow down, check in. Is this what I want? Is this a priority in my life? And then move forward with intention, with, with that feeling of like, this is actually what I want, not just doing things to do things because I feel like we should be busy. And yeah, slowing down and checking in, for me, it's also, I would say it can be scary because we don't always know what's there. But I think it's scarier to never know what's there and live your life with potential regrets,
Absolutely, for sure. That's amazing. Well, I could honestly listen to you talk all day, Victoria. Your voice is so soothing. You're so calm. You're so knowledgeable. And I'm so excited that we get to share this with our community, not just here in the Cortes, but again, hopefully worldwide we can reach this. And we're so grateful that you were able to take the time and join us on this podcast today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. So great to chat with you.
Yeah. If you just want to share with the listeners where they can find you on social media platforms or your website and so on.
Yeah, so I hang out mostly on Instagram. I have a ton of fun there, post a lot of content, a lot of trainings and stuff. So that is at Victoria Evans Official. And on my website, if you want to book a free discovery call with me for coaching, that is at www.victoriaevansofficial.com. And I also have my podcast called Weighing In on Happy. And we basically discuss everything that has to do with happiness. That, spoiler, it has nothing to do with weight. So bring on some really cool, amazing guests. Like I said, Own It Babe, and really cool people that are really changing the industry, challenging what it means to be happy and living a wellness kind of lifestyle.
Awesome. So I will tag all of Victoria's handles and information in the comments, and you guys can connect with her there.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share on social media that you're listening to the Wellness on Purpose podcast.